Hey everyone, Mr. Macintosh here, and we're back with another OpenCore Legacy Patcher update video, but this one is special because 0.6.6 comes with a brand new application update. Just take a look at this. With all the changes in here and in the settings, we're going to go over all these pieces in this video, along with going over whether it's okay to install it on the latest version of macOS Big Sur, macOS Monterey, macOS Ventura, and I'm going to give you a live walkthrough demo on how to update to the brand new version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.6.6. We got a lot to cover. You're definitely going to want to stick around for this one. Let's jump in and get started. Beginning here, I wanted to go over all of the changes and features in the 0.6.6 update. We'll go over some of the points of interest. Then we'll go into some of the deeper fixes that might affect you and highlight some of the important ones below. But let's go over the main topic here, and Makola calls this out right away. WWDC, which is the Worldwide Apple Developer Conference, is only 2 weeks away. That means we're going to see what macOS 14 looks in under 2 weeks, which is really exciting. We're unsure what Apple is going to do with the next operating system. All the developers and the patcher community are hoping that the changes that Apple does in 14 are not crazy enough to cause a bunch of problems for the patcher, but we will not know until the first beta is released. Makola mentions here, do keep in mind that supporting new versions of macOS is an intensive process like it was in Ventura, and they cannot predict when or potentially if support will be added to OpenCore Legacy Patcher for macOS 14. We're excited to try and see our old Macs run on the latest version. Let's concentrate on the current version 0.6.6. This release of OpenCore Legacy Patcher contains a ton of new features. A brand new layout like we talked about in the opening of this video. A new in-app update installation, which will really help and make that app update process a lot easier than having to go to the website for GitHub and then download it. We'll show you a quick demo of that later. And that'll be easier for users to update from 0.6.6 onto a newer version like 0.6.7. There's also quicker root patching for older hardware, and there's reduced extraction times for patcher support packages. It resolves a low power mode support for the 2013 trash can Mac Pro, and this is a big one that Makola was trying to fix for a while, and also resolve a AMD Terascale 1 graphics corruption and macOS Ventura issue that was happening, and many more fixed below. So those are some of the main highlights. Now let's jump into some of the full changelog fixes. Now I'm going to highlight some of the 0.6.6 changelog fixes that might be important to you in this update. First of all, there's an implementation option to disable color sync downgrade on HD 3000 Macs, for example, a 2011 MacBook Pro, and that allows for display profile support on some units, and no black box rendering issues may likely appear. So we can take a look at that in the new settings here. We'll click on settings and we'll click on root patching. You can see here disable color sync downgrade for the HD 3000 GPU in Ventura or newer. Next here we have an improvement for identification on the payloads DMG package that's mounted when you have the application running. If you had the application running on previous versions, it would be mounted as payloads DMG, and you may be wondering what the heck is that. So if you go over to our 2011 demonstration Mac here, we're running 0.6.5 and we can see that in action. If we open up disk utility, we can see that anytime we're running the app, we've got this mount that has the files that OpenCore Legacy Patcher needed, and the user sees payloads and they're like, what the heck is this mounted on my system if they're running disk utility. But if we look on our 2015 demonstration system here running 0.6.6 and then open up disk utility, we can see the change. It's now called Open Patcher Resources Base. Now we understand this is for OpenCore Legacy Patcher. There was also a fix for incorrect KDK matching for macOS betas. For example, beta 4 KDK was being recommended for beta 3. That was fixed. Also, back to that 2013 Mac Pro 6.1 low power mode fix, there was also credit here from Makola that gives to KCJ for a PCI bus patch fix. So you can take a look at the GitHub for that if you were interested. There's also a PCI eject menu appearing on unsupported hardware. So if you had a Mac Pro, you would see this little menu bar up here in the top, and you would click on it, it would say eject hardware. Well, this fix also removes that from Mac Pro, so that's another nice fix. And there's one here that resolves a kernel panic on Wake for AMD Terascale 1 and NVIDIA Tesla 8000 series GPUs. If you had a Mac Pro 3.1 and macOS Ventura installed and that machine went to sleep, it lost Ethernet, so that is fixed in this release. There was another fix here for resolves graphics corruption wake for Terrascale 1, and the patch is currently limited to Ventura and newer. There was also a function key fix on MacBook 5.1 and MacBook 4.1, thanks Jasny. Also, there's an update on non-metal Mac binaries, and there were some issues with crashes with SSHD. There was a screen recording regression problem. There was also a photo booth issue on macOS Monterey and later, and this may require TCC Plus for permissions. Also, whenever the helper came up, or the helper dialog, when you're doing different things in the application, it was changed from OCLP-helper to OpenCore-patcher to better identify what's going on in those display prompts. Also, the application changes that we saw in the GUI here are explained. These changes allow for easier maintenance and future expansion. The changes include a reworked graphics user interface, a new download user interface with time remaining. There's also an implementation of an in-app update system that is for 0.6.6, and I mentioned that earlier in the highlights. I'm going to show you a video that Macola made so you can see how that process will work when you update from 0.6.6 to 0.6.7. Also, there's an expanded app update that includes nightly users. For example, anybody that is testing a nightly release and that wants to go to a full public release. Also, an implementation of macOS installer verification after flashing, and this will help for users that were having problems with the installer. So they would make the installer, then they would go boot to it, it would boot fine, and then it would say the installer is damaged. So there's extra verification happening there, and that's a really nice fix for reliability. And then there's default sections for disks and installers, and then set about and quit items were added to the menu here. There was also some changes around the authorization prompts to avoid just displaying a generic OSA script in the title, so you better understand these prompts and they are belonging to the OpenCore Legacy Patcher application. Now we're going to move to showing whether it's okay to install on Big Sur, Monterey, and macOS Ventura. I want to make it clear why I go over each operating system, because I get a lot of questions in the comments whether it's safe to update to the latest version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher or the latest version of macOS, whatever it is for the software update. For this demonstration Mac here today, we're running a early 2013 15-inch MacBook Pro on OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.6.6 and macOS Big Sur 11.7.7, the latest version. Now that's a fair question whether it's okay to install, and that's why I try to use multiple different pieces of MacBook hardware, because it seems like the most of the machines that are being used today are laptops. So that's why I want to try to focus on the laptops for the demonstration machines, and that comes from Macola's data collection that was put into the 0.6.5 update. All that helps the developers understand where to focus on the updates and what kind of Macs that are out there. That's why I installed the latest version of macOS and the latest version of OpenCore to show as best as I can that there's no issues with this particular hardware. Now, it doesn't guarantee it's not going to affect your machine, because we've seen that before. There's one specific piece of hardware that causes problems, but this at least gives a good general understanding that at the very least, one machine is working very well with the latest update. We are running 11.7.7 and the latest version of OpenCore are in EFI 0.9.2, and everything is running great on macOS Big Sur. And remember how I tell you to check the post install root patch button here, and we can click this on the new version of OpenCore. And with macOS Big Sur, no patches are required on metal Macs, which is again really nice if you're running any metal heavy applications. There's no crashes, no issues, no incompatibilities. So this is where macOS Big Sur still comes in strong and a reason to use it for certain situations. Now let's talk about whether it's safe to install macOS Monterey 0.6.6, which is the latest version, and OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.6.6. No issues have been called for, and macOS Monterey is now turning into the workhorse. If you're looking for, again, a reliable system, macOS Monterey is where it's at right now, and it's running very well. No issues have been reported so far. Next up is macOS Ventura. The latest version is macOS Ventura 13.4, running on OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.6.6. No no issues at the upgrade. The EFI again running 092. And if we take a look at the post-install root patches, all patches have been already installed on today. Everything's running very well on this Mac, no issues to report. So we should be good to go on macOS Ventura 13.4. Now let's go over a full demo on how to get your older version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher to the latest new version of 0.6.6. Another thing, and I want to note on the statistics that Macola is collecting for the developers, we talked about that a little bit earlier, is what version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher is most installed on the user base. And one of the things that was interesting is that obviously 0.65 is the current one as of now, but there's a lot of people still running 0.6.4 out there. So if you're on 0.64, that's no big deal. You can update right to 0.6.6. So as soon as you open the application, you should see the update to OpenCore Patcher screen. All you need to do is click on View on GitHub or go to the main OpenCore Legacy Patcher page. We'll scroll down here and we'll get OpenCore Patcher GUI app.zip. We'll let that download. And one thing you'll notice here is the download is a little bit smaller. That was called out here. It's 462. It was larger, so it's nice that the download size is getting a little bit smaller. While we're waiting for that to finish, we will close the previous application and we'll open up our applications folder. If you don't have your disks showing here on the right side, you can always go to Finder, go to Settings, and you can go show the hard disk. We will click our downloads down here and we'll see that the OpenCore Patcher is right in our downloads. We'll drag that right over to Applications and we will replace our previous version of 0.6.5 with the latest version of 0.66. We will click on O to bring us right to the application and let's fire it up. Demonstration Mac here today is a 2011 15-inch MacBook Pro, and I wanted to make sure that the demonstration Mac this time around was a non-metal Mac from 2012 forward and non-metal 2011 and under. That's why I wanted to show this, because sometimes those are the ones that have most of the trouble. So now that we've got the latest version of the app, that's step one complete. We've got two more steps to complete. I checked ahead of time. We're on release 091 for the OpenCore on our EFI partition that we use for the bootloader. So we are going to update that first. So let's click build and install OpenCore on the new application. Automatically builds it out for you, ready to go. So now all we need to do is click install the disk. And notice here there's a big change. In previous versions, there was the blue text that showed you the currently booted item for OpenCore. So let's say you had multiple hard drives, the blue one would show you which one is booted, and it was just under blue text, but now the entire button is highlighted, so all you need to do is click on it. And the EFI partition box is simple to be able to click here. We'll click on that, and then all we need to do is type in our password. And we'll mount and update the EFI partition and show us that we need to reboot. We'll click on reboot and restart. Alright, we're back up after step 2, installing to the EFI partition with the 0.6.6 OpenCore settings. Let's open up our Patcher application again, and we can use that NVRAM to make sure that we updated the OpenCore from 091 to 092. So let's put the NVRAM command in. I'll put this in the description below. We're on release 092. Now keep in mind, there is a way that we can check that without running the NVRAM command in the new version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.6.6, and I'll show you that at the end of the video. Now keep in mind, if you have any questions about any of this process with the new application, feel free to put those in the comments now. Okay, now that we have that done, we can move on to step 3, which is installing the post-root patches. So we can click on that button next. We have 2 sets of graphics patches that we're going to install, and we have the Legacy Keyboard backlight to be able to install. And the last time we patched was on May 18th, 2023. Blue button is already highlighted to get us to go that way. We'll click on the blue button to start the root patching. We need to relaunch as root, administrator password. And look at the change right here, right off the bat. One of the new changes is that it's telling you right above here in this menu what it's patching again if you missed that first while we were picking the next screen. And then it's going to go through here and finish those patches. And then it'll give us the option to reboot. Now also, if it needs the KDK, if it's a Mac that needs the kernel debug kit, it'll download that during this time too and install that and then patch the system. But if it doesn't need that, you will not see that part like this particular Mac. Now all we need to do is reboot because the patching is complete. And then we'll restart. Okay, we're back up after the post-root patch installs. Now let's go in there and verify to make sure everything installed properly. So let's click on post-install root patch, and there we go. All patches have been already installed, and we are good to go on 0.6.6 and macOS Ventura 13.4. How simple is that, right? Now that we have all that down, I want to go into some of the changes, and I'm going to compare the latest version of the changes of 0.6.6 to 0.6.5. Okay, right off the bat, you can see a big change here. I can't tell you how humbled I am to be able to talk with Makola about some improvement ideas to the main application. The previous version worked perfectly. It opened up, it had all the information that it needs and all the buttons that you needed to do things. But what would happen is on larger screens, for example, the 5K iMac, it was a little bit harder to see with the resolution. So this small box would be there. We worked together with some ideas on how to rework the main menu, and I can't tell you how happy I am to see how it turned out. I mean, I think it looks absolutely wonderful with the icons, the buttons, and especially the inscriptions on what each button does. For veteran users, no big deal. You already know what all this stuff is. But if you're a new user and you're kind of coming in here like, oh man, I don't know what the heck to do. Some of these are simple, like, oh, create the installer. Okay, that's easy. But post through, patch, install OpenCore. Okay, well, right here, build and install OpenCore prepares the provided drive to be able to boot unsupported versions of macOS. Use on installers or internal drives. So it gives you at least an idea of what's going to happen when you click on this button. Then you've got the post-install root patches. Installs hardware drivers and patches for your system after installing a new version of macOS. For macOS Monterey or macOS Ventura, the drivers that were required for that piece of hardware were removed by Apple. Part of the things that OpenCore Legacy Patcher does is puts those pieces back in, and that's part of the post-install root patch process. So it calls that out really nicely here for the user to help understand. And then right here, create macOS installer. Again, seems pretty straightforward, right? But this shows you, it says download and flash macOS installer to your system, or obviously USB drive. Then you've got the support box. If you need help with anything running OpenCore Legacy Patcher, you can click on there to have some different support options. And then finally, we have our settings button. So we walked over all the changes already in some of the build and install OpenCore, but we didn't take a look here at the create macOS installer. So for the create macOS installer part, we can click on this on both applications. We'll click download and we'll click on download over here. But there is a special option here. Once we see all the installers, we'll know a change right away that it shows the default latest version, which is macOS Ventura 13.4 highlighted here in blue. There's also a change that when we click show all available installers like this, now we have a button that we can go back that was not available on the previous 0.6.5. We had to go back to the main menu. This will show us only the available installers that we want to be able to concentrate on, not including previous versions or any kind of betas. Now that we're back at the main menu, we can see the support options in the previous version of 0.6.5 were under help. Right here under support, same section, the official guide, the official phone support number so you can contact Asentient's bots on his cell phone number, and the community Discord server. A lot of the changes are right here in the settings. So let's click on the settings so we can see the brand new system, and look how nice this is. We've got a nice large screen here with all the descriptions for each of the changes. So when we were previously in the settings, again, it looked good, but it was a little bit small, and some of them were behind multiple different boxes, and there really sometimes wasn't an explanation right above here, and you didn't know that, for example, you could hover over one of these to see the explanation, but a lot of people didn't know you could do that. So instead, it's right here, right in front of you, showing you what each one of these sections does. Now, keep in mind, when you have your model selected, it automatically selects the settings that you need to be able to have a proper booting working system. You can come in here and work with some of these settings if you need, but usually you need to know what you're doing before you do that. Some of them could cause problems if you don't know what you're doing. That's why there's these descriptions here, and that's why they're automatically selected. But notice here the target model. The target model is pointed out right here of what Mac you have. If I'm running this on a MacBook Pro 8.2, it's going to be automatically selected. But let's say you wanted to build a USB installer on this MacBook Pro 2019 that I'm doing this video on. So if we close out the application here, we'll see what that actually looks like. MacBook Pro 16.1, and we can already see, hey, wait a minute, build and install OpenCore is grayed out because this is a native system and it already supports Ventura. But then you can click on settings and then click on app, and then you can click Allow Native Models. Now what that does is, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a Mac that can install macOS Monterey, but you want to be able to use Universal Control, but that Mac wasn't compatible. So you can actually use OpenCore Legacy Patcher to unlock Universal Control for that Mac, but you have to click Allow Native Models, and then you get the option here, warning, Allow Native Models. You can click on Yes, and then you can go back to Return, and then you can click on Build and Install OpenCore. Now that's not grayed out anymore. So the other options here, we have SIP settings. We can click on SIP settings. You can see all these settings. When we go back into settings, the SIP settings are now under security, and you can see all the SIP settings that are set to the default model. Again, notice how there are no settings here for the default model, which is a native model, but there is for the MacBook Pro 8,2 that we had selected here. So if we go back here and click on MacBook Pro 8,2, we will see those settings change immediately to the model that we're using. So we'll go back to security, and we can see that those settings are matching what we're setting over here in the 6065 version. We can walk through each one of these tabs here, and you can see that some of these have been redesigned into general areas and debug that to better understand where these features are. For example, in 065 in the miscellaneous settings, that's where you had FireWire Boot. But FireWire Boot now is under general. If you had a FireWire external drive, you could click this and you would be able to boot an installer or an OS off of there with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. And some of the things like the wake on LAN and content caching, for example, right here, and APFS trim is all here in the general section. Now, when we go down to the debug area, this helps you if you're having any kind of booting issues. You can click this on and it will show the output for verbose. When you're booting, it'll show all the text during the boot process. There's also Kex debugging. You can use debug variants of Kex and enables additional kernel logging if you're having any problems there. And there's also OpenCore debugging. Use debug variant of OpenCore enables additional logging, again, if you're having problems with certain sections of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. The other one that a lot of people use with Mac Pro for different video cards, for example, is the boot picker timeout. If we go back to the settings here, they're in the developer settings for the boot picker timeout, and again that's moved back to general. And again, what that's used for is if you're firing up a Mac Pro and you need some time before the monitor comes on to be able to get to the boot picker. If it happens faster than 5 seconds, you can move this up to 10 seconds and still be able to use the boot picker if the monitor shows up with a delay. So that's again a nice feature, and that's in the general section. Another one that we turn on and off depending on how you roll is the show boot picker. But if you don't like that and you want the native set like a native Mac, you can click that off, and on here it's just unclick on here and that turns on the boot picker. You also notice that APFS trim is in there, and that's for SSDs. Like for example, for older Macs that never had an SSD option, this will do garbage collection and stuff like that to keep the SSD clean. The next tab here is the extras, but it is also more of the general options continued on the next screen. Wake from LAN in the previous miscellaneous section. There's also areas that you might see that are grayed out. That means that either the target Mac is not compatible with that option, and there's some other options here that you might need, but again, all of these are going to be defaulted to your specific model. In the next tab for advanced, we've got some other miscellaneous items, and this is where the feature unlock is from the previous miscellaneous settings on 0.6.5. We'll configure your feature unlock level, recommended for lowing if your system is experiencing memory instability or other issues. You have this enabled, but you can put partial or disabled if you're having issues, and then rebuild and install OpenCore. We've also have the hibernation workaround setting for only on minimum EFI drivers to prevent hibernation issues. This may break booting from external drives for certain graphics GPUs. So when I mentioned on the previous section the grayed out areas are not available for the hardware doesn't match, we can show you that live. Particular one here for the graphics override is for iMac. So if we change our target model here to an iMac, like 12,1, and then the app reloads the settings and we go back to advanced, we can see that these options are now available to pick. So I just wanted to show you that live, what that looks like. The next tab is for security. So we can see under kernel security, we have the library validation and AMFI and then secure boot model. Now, if we go over here to the previous version of 065, we can click on the SIP settings in here and we can see those same settings for the SIP settings. But if we needed to get to AMFI or library validation, we would have to go into the developer settings and we can see that those are right here to be able to check mark. So again, this is a nice layout for all those security settings all in one area in the security tab. Now we can talk about the SM BIOS section here for model spoofing. If we go back in the 065, we can see those same settings in the SM BIOS settings to be able to set the spoof level. It has a nice description of which each spoof level does. None, obviously no spoofing. Minimal overrides the board ID of the Mac that you're booting, and then moderate overrides the model, and advanced overrides the model and serial. Again, keep this the default level unless you are testing something. And then we also have the spoof model that you can come in here and change to a different one, set the Mac model to spoof to, and then you also have allow spoofing for native Macs, allow OpenCore to spoof natively, supported Macs primarily used for enabling universal control on unsupported Macs. So that's the SM BIOS section. Also down here below is the serial spoofing. And I want to explain what this is really quick. There's a lot of users that get scammed by Facebook scammers or eBay or Craigslist scammers that sell a Mac. There's a very specific message here that calls this out. And I want to read this. Warning, please take caution when using serial spoofing. This should only be used on machines that were legally obtained that require reserialization. Note, new serials are overly overlaid through OpenCore and are not permanently installed in the ROM. Misuse of this setting can break power management and other aspects of the OS and if the system does not need spoofing. The project does not condone the use of our software on stolen devices. Are you sure you want to continue? What that means is an example of this would be if a company went out of business and that machine was sold and the user got it and was scammed, they are completely screwed with that machine. It is now MDM managed and cannot be used by that user. And there's nothing they can do. A lot of times the seller disappears from Facebook and they're screwed. You're using this on a very specific situation. The next section here is for root patching. As you can see, we've got root volume patching options for Terascale 2 acceleration and disable color sync for the HD 3000. We went over that earlier in the notes. And then the non-metal configuration work that is being done by the non-metal team to make the graphics better. Previously in 065, those were in the non-metal settings sector for dark menu bar, enable beta blur, and disable beta rim. But we can see all those sections moved over here and has some new options called beach ball cursor workaround. And that means that in those sections, they turned off the cursor spin and made it solid to prevent CPU intensive use for a non-metal Macs, which is kind of a neat thing that you can test out. And there's also the beta menu bar that supports dynamic color changes. Note, this setting is still experimental, and if you experience issues, please disable the setting. Now, when you set these settings, these are not OpenCore settings, meaning that you don't have to build and install OpenCore. When you select this option and click return, you log out. A logout is required to apply these settings, and then you log back in and the settings will be set. These are grayed out because there's nothing set on this Mac. So if we go back to our demonstration Mac here, our 2011 MacBook Pro that has a non-metal graphics on it, we can go into settings and then we can go into the root patching and we can see all these are selectable now. So for example, if I wanted to test out the beta menu bar, I set that now and then I click on return and then I log out and log back in, and that setting is now being utilized for your login. And now we're utilizing the dynamic menu bar color changes option in the non-metal section. Celebration of the brand new redesigned 0.6.6 OpenCore Legacy Patcher, I thought it would be fun to bring together all of the previous versions and changes over the years. If you've been with OpenCore Legacy Patcher for a while, you know what this is right away. This is TUI, Terminal User Interface. You would go through a menu system in the terminal app to be able to create the installer and do all the items that we do today. I have a special place in my heart for this because this is where I learned OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and I still love the TUI, and there's still a lot of people that still have fond memories of that, but it's no longer supported. So the last version that was built was 0.4.6. The next version was 0.2.3 that came out to give a GUI type design. This is one of the first examples, and this was actually written by Colin Doss dude to help with the project. And this came out for 0.2.3 and had just two basic buttons for build and install and patch the system volume with some settings here. And then that's when we moved to our current set, a nice menu box system, and here we are finally with 0.6.6. And it's just neat to look over the previous versions and how much the patcher has improved, and it's going to be really interesting to see where we go with macOS 14. I know this is a long video. Hopefully I answered some of those questions. If you have any questions on all the different changes in 0.6.6, feel free to please put those down in the comments and I'll help you out. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.